In Copilot Studio, users can send attachments and the agent can analyze the file, performing operations based on its data. But what if you wanted to save these attachments in a SharePoint folder? This is exactly what we'll do in this video, and for that, we need only one node in Copilot Studio and only two actions in a Power Automate flow. And just as a disclaimer, Copilot Studio is constantly updated, and the solution you will see right now in this video is being tested in March 2026. So to get started, I already have here this very simple Copilot Studio agent with some instructions to initialize the upload file topic whenever the user mentions they are uploading, attaching, or sending a file. And so far, if you go to this topic, you'll see that there is nothing else besides the trigger itself. And this trigger is detailing that Copilot will just summarize the content of the attached file. This agent is already deployed to Teams, and here in the test pane, you can see an example of this upload file topic working. So now let's make a few changes here so you can save this file to SharePoint instead of just summarizing it. And the first thing to do here is to create a new tool. So I'll come here onto the tab and select the tools, and I'll add a new tool here. And for this task in particular, I will need to create a new agent flow. But before that, we technically could use a create file action from the SharePoint connector here directly in Copilot Studio. But I ran a few tests with this approach, and at least as of March 2026, there is too much hallucination when you rely on this connector. So for this specific task, working with an agent flow will be a much more stable approach. So here I'll simply click into create new agent flow. And then here you see this interface that is very similar to a Power Automate flow design. And it is like this because all agent flows are built on the top of Power Automate flows. And by the way, I will leave a link in the video description to my Power Automate online course so you can extract the maximum value from these automated workflows in both Power Automate and Copilot Studio. So here we have this pre-built flow with two steps only. And if I expand this when an agent calls the flow, you see that we have an option here to create a new input, and that's exactly what we will do. And then here we just need to select what is the data type of the input we are expecting. And among all of those options, I'll select file. So this input setting allows us to define any data that we want to pass from the agent to the flow. And here I could provide a name and a description to this input if I wanted to. But for this case, I'll simply leave it as it is. Now, between the flow call and the response to the agent, I'll simply click into this plus sign over here to include another step into this flow. And I'll then search for apply to each. And this step will basically generate a loop and repeat the same action or the same set of actions against all elements of a list. And for our example here, we'll look a list of files that were attached by the user when interacting with Copilot. So for the input of this apply to each step, I'll simply click here into this FX button to provide an expression. And here in the expression pane, I'll simply type trigger body, and then I'll say file, and then I'll say attachments. And if you're not familiar with Power Automate expression, what's happening here is that we're first accessing the body property of the trigger of this flow, and the trigger is exactly this when an agent calls the flow step. And right after accessing its body, we are accessing the file subproperty, which is exactly this input that we just defined a few seconds ago. And then finally, we are accessing another subproperty named attachments, which we'll define when calling this agent from inside our upload file topic. So now I can simply click add over here. And one last thing to do here is to define what this flow will do for all files looped by this applied to each step. And for that, I'll simply click into this plus sign inside the apply to each block. And I'll search for create file. And here I could select the create file action from the OneDrive for Business if I wanted to create this file in my OneDrive. But for this case, I want to create this file into a SharePoint document library, so select the respective action from the SharePoint connector. Now here, I just need to specify the SharePoint site and the document library where I want to save my attachments to. So here I'll quickly select the mutual community and the Copilot Studio subfolder. And I then need to provide a name and a content to the file to be created. And for both cases, I will use an expression. So starting with the name, I'll simply click here into the FX again, and I'll say item name with capital N here. And this expression is basically taking whatever is the name of the currently iterated attachment in this loop and assigning it to the newly created file in SharePoint. And for the content, I'll do the same thing. So I'll click in FX again, I'll say item, but at this time I'll say content instead of name. And content also with capital C. And one last thing to do for this content expression is to enclose everything with a base 64 to binary function, because here we need to convert the attachment received from Copilot Studio from base 64, which is a kind of text value, into a binary format in order to save that to SharePoint without corrupting the file. So here my expression is already here. I'll simply click add, and now our flow steps are already good. So I can simply click publish on the top right corner. And now my flow was published successfully, so I can simply click go back to the agent. And just before we edit our agent, there is one last thing to do in Power Automate. So here I have my flows list for this environment, and if I refresh it, you see that now I have this untitled flow at the top, which is exactly the automation that we just created in the agent flow page. You can see here that it was created 30 seconds ago. And after opening this flow, I'll just click here in the details area so we can rename this flow to something more meaningful, something like upload files to point and save it. Now then, scroll down the page until this run only user settings, and I'll click edit here as well. And I'll then change this SharePoint dropdown from provided by run only user to use this connection and my connection here. I'll then click OK, and I'll hit save. And this step is important because it will force the automation to use the maker credentials instead of prompting the user to provide their SharePoint permissions when interacting with the agent. So that's it for Power Automate. Now we can come back to Copilot Studio. And then here, I will come back to the Topics tab, and I'll select my upload file topic. And now here I will include a second node, and I'll then expand this add a tool. And here I can find few tools available in my environment, and it should include the upload file to SharePoint. We don't have it here, but we have this untitled flow, which hopefully is the same flow that we created in the tools page. And then here, as a last step, I have to provide an input to this flow, which is exactly the file input that we defined when we were creating this automation in the tools page. So for that, I'll just include formula. So I'll click here and select variable and then formula. I will expand this field here, and I will provide it with a JSON object. So I will open and close curly brackets here. And inside this object, I will use the attachments as a key. And for a value, I'll simply provide system variable. So I'll say system activity attachments. So here we are defining a JSON object because our automation's file content input is expecting a record data type, which has a JSON object format. And inside this JSON, we are declaring a single property called attachments, because this is the same name that we used inside our agent flow when we were defining the apply to each step. So now I can simply click insert over here, since this formula looks good. And I can now save this topic and publish this agent. So the agent was published, and we can now finally test it on Teams. So I already have a conversation open with this agent here. I will just upload here a few PDF files that I have as an example, and I'll say upload file. So the agent orchestration will take our message to the upload file topic. And now the agent is processing my request. So if I come here now to Power Automate and refresh the flow runs, and refresh it again, we will see that Our flow is running. Let me refresh it one more time. And as you can see, the status now shows as succeeded. So if I now go to this SharePoint folder and refresh it, we'll see that now I have here 3 new PDF files that are created a few seconds ago. And if I open any of those files, you'll see that we have here the content, so it's not broken, which is great. And one last thing is that I have a copy of this exact same agent and this automation, but without an user authentication, which allows us to test it with a website embedding. So here, I'll just upload another PDF file. Let's say upload file. And the automation will process the attachment and store it to the SharePoint folder, just like it did for Microsoft Teams.